And good evening and welcome everyone to another one of our live AMA crypto sessions here at Sarson Funds. My name is Ivan Dimov. I'll be host for the evening, and joining me tonight is Jahon Jamali, our CMO and co-founder of Sarson Funds.
Thank you very much, Ivan. And I'm thrilled to be hosting one of these AMA sessions once again. Tonight's going to be a really special session for us. I'm really excited. We have a special guest, Robert Grant from Crown Sterling, who is, I'm going to say it, Robert, one of the smartest individuals I've ever encountered, and unbelievably engaging in the way in which he can translate some very complex concepts about the state of our society, the state of our personal sovereignty, and the future and what it might hold, as we start to enter this new digital age. So I want to be the first to say, Robert, thank you and welcome for coming on today.
Jahon, always a pleasure to see you. You're one of the most dynamic people I know. And I'm very excited for this conversation and cannot wait to hear what all you want to talk about and all the comments and questions that we get from the crowd as well.
Oh, well, fantastic. I'm thrilled. I've been looking forward to this now since for the last couple of weeks. So what I wanted to do, though, I wanted to get folks oriented to where our conversation is going to go. And one of your life passions has been to, not only be a proponent, but a practitioner and a trailblazer in this concept of personal data sovereignty and self-sovereignty. So I wanted to just turn it over to you for a little bit, and if we could maybe just give our audience, because some of them might be very new to this concept of what is personal data sovereignty and self-sovereignty, and why is it important?
So, as I kind of think about this topic, I think it's literally becoming very rapidly the most important topic in the world right now, because this is going to be relative to how we conduct democracy, how we live in free societies, how we operate, whether there's going to be censorship or not. And actually, it speaks to the very nature of who we are as individuals. Data has now become an extension of who we are as people. That's very different because it didn't exist that way before. And I'm in the process of writing a book right now that we just decided to name Information Plantation. What we don't know in this world today is that what has grown up around us with all the digital changes and new technologies and everything that's happened, all of us on social media, is that we are being mined, just like in the movie, The Matrix, for data, except it's not energy. See, in that film, they got it wrong. It was right, but it was wrong in that it wasn't energy, it was data. Now, I could make an argument from a physics standpoint that data and information are kind of, and as well as energy, are kind of all synonymous. We can, have them be interchangeable. But what this means today is that we've already known since 1997, when they cloned Dolly the sheep, that people can be cloned, right? And I don't know about you, but I have been a victim of identity theft. Have you had identity theft, John?
Yeah, I have, unfortunately.
And how was that for you?
I mean, you totally feel taken advantage of. It's gut-wrenching.
It's gut-wrenching. And not only that, I called the police station, right? Because that's what I was told to do. I need to file a police report. And what do you think they told me? Oh, we don't do that. We don't do that. So then am I supposed to call the FBI? And I knew exactly where my identity was stolen from. I was in a hotel in Miami, and they took my key from my room and sold that key to somebody. And all that information on the key was on there. And so they stole my identity. And next thing I know, I had all kinds of bills from T-Mobile and stuff. I never had a T-Mobile account. So the point I realized at that moment was, wait a minute, I can do nothing about this. My identity is now gone. And wait a minute, in the future, in a dystopian style future, who's to stop anyone from even being able to take one of my strands of hair that I leave anywhere? And, hopefully I won't be losing my hair anytime soon. But if I lose one here or there, someone could take that and actually clone my body. Clone who I am. So then what is the essence of who I am? My experiences and my memories, right? It's the things that I do. It's my search history. It's all the things that I'm doing both digitally and in reality. And in the future, that is going to be tantamount to who we are as individuals, day in and day out. I see a day in the not too distant future where we'll have to have some form of digital identification that everyone, and some people are going to go, wait, that sounds like, Revelation in the Bible. Well, at the end of the day, it's going to end up being necessary that we have some mechanism to prove who we say we are, because otherwise we won't have a mechanism to do it. So, but wait a minute. If all of these things like my search history, the people that I'm interacting with on social media, my habits of purchasing, as well as my attitudinal shift, as well as behavioral data and all of that, if that's not owned by me, then who owns it?
Right. And like one of the things too, I don't think people realize, Robert, is who does own that data that's being collected now? I mean, everybody knows that web platforms and social media platforms are monetizing data, but I don't really think it really hits folks like the types of data, the passive amounts of data, and the multiples by which this is already being monetized.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it yet, please go and watch Social Dilemma on Netflix, and you'll see exactly what we're talking about here. Your data is now being sold. If you're participating on any kind of social media platform or even just visiting companies on the internet, there are beacons that are attached to you. You don't even know it necessarily. Those cookies that are getting attached to you. And all of your data is being monetized, either aggregated up or individually, and being sold to other parties. Now, that market today is already 5,000 companies that just broker it. 5,000 companies broker your data. And you don't even realize that this is not really any different than your blood. Let's say that you're in college and you're broke, like I was broke in college. And my friends were like, should we go sell some blood plasma, right? Well, there's value in your blood. Well, what's different now is that like, this isn't like vampires taking your blood and you waking up in the morning and saying, oh, I have like marks on my neck. These are vampires that left no marks, that you let them in the front door, and they're literally taking your value from you, and you don't know how valuable it is. That industry today is over $250 billion a year. It's the fastest growing industry on the planet. And today, data is now the most valuable asset known to man. So you might say, well, wait a minute, how could data be the most valuable asset? It's not, it's not scarce. It's infinite. We get more and more data every day. So then you have to ask yourself the question, well, what's driving the value attribution for it? And it's really the control of data that is valuable. And if you don't have control over your own data in the future, we're all going to be in a very, very different world. And we're already seeing elements of a dystopian reality in, things like forced mandates. And, I was vaccinated, but I'll say this, I don't believe in a forced mandate structure at all. I just can't. To me, that's sort of antithetical to the whole way we see life. And all of these things are now being challenged. So all of this data, your health data, your information for insurance companies, all of this stuff is now being aggregated up and sold up for billions of dollars, and other parties are making money off it. That's why we're calling our book Information Plantation. We don't even know it, but we're on a plantation and we're harvesting information, but we don't, as original producers, actually have ownership claim to it in the current paradigm. So right, go ahead.
Robert, let me ask, so do you think just most people are oblivious to it, or are making that subconscious, trade in their head for like, okay, I get a new experience or I get access to a new app? Do you think they don't have a sort of a perspective on the amount of monetization that's occurring just on their usage and data collection?
I don't think they know. I think if Facebook, there's already been data that's been published on this. If Facebook had to write a check to everybody for just the amount of money they make off the data sale, right? It's like $600 last year that they'd have to write you a check for. That's the total revenue off. It's not their profit because they have cost, et cetera, off of that as well. But it's growing at double every year. It's doubling every single year. So when you think about it, that's one company. Never mind all the other companies that have such a horrible system right now of protecting your data, whether it's, all these high profile hacks that have happened very recently, or ransomware that's happening right now, right? People are getting their data stolen every day also on top of it. So the value that could be associated with this, we don't really have a clue about. And so one of the things I think that's so critical about all of this is how we need to raise awareness of this exact issue and what the value is that we're missing, right? It's like we're all working on this plantation, And we don't even know that, we're creating all this value that's turning into true monetization for, the tenant farm that we become the tenant farmers of.
It has. And, one of the things that strikes me as sort of one of the obvious obstacles is that, this sort of challenges some really powerful institutions. And, we have a lot of dynamic change happening in the world right now, especially in terms of finance and even how the world is organized. But how does control over the data really become a game changer in shifting this paradigm?
So, okay, let me give you an example. We're not that far away. Already in Europe, there are already vaccination passports. They already exist. We're not at the stage yet where it's required for all travel, but I don't think a day is very far away that it will eventually be required for travel. I went to Africa not a few years ago, and I had to show all my vaccinations to get my ability to get into Botswana. So I could see this absolutely happening, but already in New York, you have to show your vaccination QR code. And if you don't have it, they'll bounce you. You can't go to places. In Australia, they just announced that they're going to say, look, if you don't have vaccination cards to prove that you've been vaccinated, then you're not even allowed to conduct commerce with other parties that are vaccinated. What? Are you kidding me? I'm not even talking about in person. I'm just talking about conducting commerce in general. There are some very bizarre things that are happening right now. And all of this data is going to be known and understood. And if we don't have a mechanism, and this is one example of it, but as we look further down the road, what other things are going to be like that? So if all of a sudden, you want to get health insurance, right, on top of whatever government insurance we may have access to. So what, if you've ever smoked a cigarette, they're going to know, or they're going to know who you've ever met with because it's all data that's been tracked on your phone. And they'll know that, oh, you were exposed to this person. Let me tell you something. The same exact thing happened with me. We got a call. I ended up having COVID last year, right? Which, by the way, is probably the very best vaccination you can get. But, I don't recommend it to people to try. It was definitely a harrowing week. For 7 days, I was very concerned about it. But I'll say this, that we got a call from the state of California not long after that saying that they knew who we'd been exposed to. How? Where's all that data coming from? So do we live in a dystopian sort of like, Handmaid's Tale world? And I think that there's got to be mechanisms to protect data and privacy and its ownership. And ownership is the answer. Lots of companies have tried to make it around privacy and have tried to protect data through privacy. Privacy laws are not very strong. Ownership laws are very strong. So what we did at Crown Sterling is we pulled together a group of experts, including Brittany Kaiser and Jody Westby and former Congressman Ed Royce, and came up with a data sovereignty or data bill of rights. And that bill of rights pegs exactly into this notion of ownership, because we believe that data is the intangible personal property of the original producer. And therefore, it's protected by the US Constitution. It's protected by the United Nations Charter. It's protected by the European Union. They're already clearly defined as what ownership rights are, and ownership is a basic human right. Ownership of property. Privacy is not listed as a basic human right.
Right. So, I mean, then again, we have all sorts of different definitions in different regions for what is private and what should be private and what's not. So we live in this dynamic change, right, where we're seeing this movement towards decentralization on a lot of different aspects, particularly obviously in the digital asset and finance space. We talked earlier about how control over data really is what can help assign part of the value, is your ability to keep it secure or control it. Where does blockchain fit into this, right? Because if you have laws and ownership laws, they're only so good as the systems that can help make or enforce those. So do centralized systems, are they the future for this, or is blockchain the pathway? Or how is blockchain maybe potentially the pathway for this type of personal data sovereignty?
I think to answer that question, I'd like to go back in history a little bit, if you'll indulge me.
Absolutely.
Right. So if you think about how money got to be money, right? And of course, precious metals were sort of the original form of money. And why was that? Well, because as a practical matter, right, you could keep gold in your castle, and gold is heavy. It's got a lot of mass, right? So if someone wants to steal it, they're not going to get very far. They can only carry as much as they probably weigh. You can't do much more than that. And at that, you won't get very far rapidly, right? Because you're going to have something to carry that. And so that presents a different kind of challenge. So you put your gold in your castle, and another party is going to come and try to steal it. They have to bring an army with them, or at least some mercenary group to try to get it from you. And then everyone's there got to die, because you're not going to get very far if you're thinking you're going to get away with it, right? So gold is practical from that perspective. It's heavy, and it holds, it's a good store of value. Well, when you think about it, all that went away in 1973. 1973 brought with it Bretton Woods, where Nixon advocated this. And what was happening is we had something called Keynesian economics that was going on then, which was said, okay, how do we smooth out all these election cycles so that we don't end up having to have all these wild swings and put the countries into depressions or deep recessions right during election cycles whenever there's a lot of uncertainty. So what they came up with is concept beyond just fiscal spending, because the way to get out of these problems, these peaks and troughs before, was through things like fiscal spending. And the best way was through wars, candidly. And all of a sudden you have a massive influx of government spending. And so that would become a stimulus. Well, with Keynesian economics, as well as, Miller Modigliani, all these researchers, economists did all this work and said, well, we should be looking at things like monetary policy. And monetary policy is a better way to smooth out the economy. We're going to play with the price of money by increasing liquidity. So the price of money is the interest rate. So if the interest rate's higher, then the price of your money is more expensive. If the interest rate's lower, then it's cheaper, right? And so you can use that interest rate to increase liquidity into society. You can print more money also.
Right.
And so
let me ask you a question, Robert.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just opine on this for a second. Then we have a bunch of questions that have come in. So I do want to make sure that we get some of them answered. So, you talked about removing from the gold standard, and, effectively, also this is during the time where we had our oil, big oil crisis.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks can make the argument that, effectively what we created was a petrodollar, where OPEC and oil, oil trade was restricted to being done with the US dollar. And oil was fueling the world. It was fueling the economic growth. And, it was that current and that, like I said, the fuel. Now, if data is going to be what drives us ahead, and we've already, I've talked earlier about how it's fueling a substantial amount of growth and is becoming the most important thing in the world, then to me, it almost seems like a natural evolution to have a currency be backed or be riding off of data itself and the immutability of it, which is where I think cryptocurrency really has its strongest foundation.
That is well said, because when you think about it, since 1973, what has backed the US dollar? And this would have never been possible to get rid of a global peg on currency that existed until 1973. Until that time, the German mark was fixed against the dollar, the Japanese yen, the peso. They were all fixed. But as soon as they got rid of the peg against gold, then all the currencies floated, right? Well, that worked because we lived in a post-World War II era that was called hegemonic stability. So if you look at political science and international relations, which I know you're an advocate of, as well as definitely an aficionado in that field, hegemonic stability meant that you had a superpower. Maybe you could argue one superpower or two superpowers. What we're seeing right now is the crumbling of all government. We're seeing right now all government and centralized systems are literally collapsing on their own weight. Now, this isn't only happening with government, it's also happening with any institution that has self-appointed themselves as the ultimate arbiter of what is real and what is fake in their world. Right?
Exactly.
You could say this is true with, sort of like organized religion. They're going through the toughest time ever right now. You could say this is true also with education and universities, which just came off this massive scandal where we all know that this has always been sort of a fixed game. And Wall Street is next. Wall Street, the reason why crypto has done so well in part is because you can't play with it the way that Wall Street has been played with. I just was complaining today about an IPO process for companies. It is so geared to benefit large investors. And we have all these laws that are supposed to be set up to protect the little guy when actually they're raping the little guy. That is just the fact of it. And I would say it to anybody. And I've seen it and I've experienced it myself many times now. And I won't be convinced otherwise because I've literally seen it happen. So what I think is happening right now is the only thing that has backed the dollar since Bretton Woods was gone, right? Since we had the Bretton Woods conference in '73 is encryption. Because think about it, you have a ledger that's centralized. You have money in your bank account, but what is it that protects that money? Well, it's really only the encryption, which is called a specific type of encryption, public key cryptography. Public key cryptography is what has been backing our dollar. It's what's been backing all money. And it makes sense that that becomes a very important aspect of value attribution. Why? Because if your encryption doesn't work, then how could you claim that there's value to the underlying asset? Because someone could just take it. We only have dollars on a centralized ledger that is digital, right? It's not like there's real dollars that are backing that up necessarily. There's certainly not gold that backs it up and no other precious metal. It's the encryption that becomes the backing for it. And we're about to go through a massive sea change because of quantum computing related to that also.
So Robert, I will wholeheartedly agree. And I want to talk about quantum computing and the threat it poses in a moment. But let's talk about, because I want to take a couple of questions from the audience. Let's talk about control and just taking data. Apple, we got a question here from a Jack. How do you feel about the recent news that Apple got stopped from releasing the tracking software or the image scraping software that they packaged up as a child abuse mechanism? I think that's a very warranted topic because it opened up, it certainly would open up a lot of Pandora's box of a lot of issues.
It definitely does. And, I was extremely disappointed because I've been a fan of Apple for a long time. And this was the first time that I literally was like, oh man, because you can argue with whatever you want to about how they reacted with the San Bernardino terrorist attack and all the stuff that happened. And they said, look, we're not going to, open up access because of terror, even though it's a terrorist activity and everything, because we know that that's a slippery slope. I was stunned when I saw that they agreed to monitor photographs. And so it's an easy crowbar, right? And we live in a world today where you got all the Republicans claiming that Democrats are pedophiles, and you got all the Democrats claiming that the Republicans are racist. It's like, enough already. I'm neither Republican nor Democrat. So I'm sitting right in the middle. I'm a libertarian, right? I will vote my conscience. I don't vote party. So what's interesting to me is that they took this one crowbar and said, okay, well, the Democrats don't seem to care so much about, personal rights and freedoms. So we don't have to worry about them. Let's go. We'll get the right side of the ledger on this one. The Republicans to agree to this by saying that, it's a crowbar to get in and get rid of all these terrible pedophiles. And so what are they going to do? They're going to say, no, I'm against stopping pedophiles. No, of course they're not going to say that, because that's going to be like reprehensible in society to do. So they use this as a crowbar to break in. And then where does it stop? The truth is, it doesn't stop. They will have access through that monitoring. And of course, there's a business model around it. The truth is this. I know this also because of my other businesses. Right now, the iPhone market and the smartphone market is reaching saturation. They need another alternative business model because they're facing a cliff in revenue coming up in 2025, where they're anticipating that their iPhone sales will be down by approximately 30 to 70%. They need a new model. So, how convenient it is. And this is what's happened in society today. Whatever we think benefits us becomes our new ethics. And that is what I think is a real breakdown in society today. So I'm definitely against this whole thing with Apple, and I'm happy that it got stopped.
Well, I think you can say the same thing for government as a whole, right? Because we have a question I'm going to address from Dara. Government itself is sort of looking for a new business model too. And right, I think that's pretty safe to say. And do you think that government is self-aware of its crumbling nature? And you know, you look at it collectively, right? This is social psychology 101 when you look at how a government works and operates in group psychology, looking for reasons to justify its existence.
Yeah, it's like what's my raison d'etre, right? What's my reason?
Right. And like by, you know, here's the thing, stimulus money, it's really difficult to take away payments to people once you start them. And then you start to get people reliant on it. And once you have them ordered in systems and processes, then you've created a reason to exist. You've created a reason to continue. And I think that government's at this turning point where they're looking, collectively to justify its own existence, right? Because as we were talking about before, I'm fascinated by this concept of the network state as we move past this nation state system, right? And the amount of information and interconnectivity that we've experienced over the last couple of decades has liberated information and knowledge to such a degree that's never been experienced before in human history, where this type of knowledge and access to info was reserved for, heads of state or captains of industry or heads of a church. And it hasn't really been democratized like it has now. And I think people are starting to obviously, be more self-reliant. So my concern is, what's government's reaction going to be? I mean, government in and of itself, besides like a couple little hiccups in history, doesn't self-contract ever, no matter what the system.
No, governments never get smaller. They only get bigger, right? Until they collapse, right? And usually on their own weight. And that's actually what we're all experiencing right now. I mean, I'm one of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of people that would sit on podcasts like this and say, we're witnessing the fall of our society right now. But I don't think it's doom and gloom. I think this is good evolution. And let me speak to that. But first, I'll go back a little bit more into history, because I believe that history can teach us valuable lessons. And there were very wise people from ancient times to today that have left us great records, like Plato in his book, The Republic. So when you look at Plato's Republic, it talks about all the different forms of government, right? And when the founding fathers were establishing the United States of America, right after they signed the Declaration of Independence, they had, they had this big problem. First of all, they had this huge issue where you have, it was, of course, George Washington and Benjamin Franklin and all these guys. And so basically they couldn't get two states to agree on everything. So one of them was, actually there were three states involved that couldn't agree on everything. One was Pennsylvania, the other was New York, and the other was South Carolina. And ultimately South Carolina was a schism that led to the Civil War, not even 100 years later. It was less than 100 years later, it led to the Civil War. So, but as they're walking out and they thought, okay, we're going to be all these rebels and we're going to send this letter to the king, King George. And they said, okay, we don't want taxation without representation. Well, what happened? Of course, King George shocked them, because he sent back a proclamation saying, you're all terrorists and I'm going to have you all hanged, right? And so Benjamin Franklin famously said, well, what we couldn't do to unite ourselves, the English king just did for us, because now either we shall surely hang together or we will surely hang separately. And that forged and galvanized the founding fathers into finally signing, because they had no choice. They literally had no choice. So what happened after they signed the Declaration of Independence, George Washington walks out and Benjamin Franklin walks out, and a woman stops him and said, what do we have? What happened? What happened? And she said, and he looks at her and he says, Madam, we have a republic if we can keep it. Now, what does a republic mean? And this is really the form of representative democracy. Now, I was not a huge fan of blockchain until I fully grokked it. I had to grok the meaning of the word grok, But then secondly, I had to fully understand what was really going on here with blockchain, why blockchain was special. Because actually the currency that allows governments to exist without asking what's their raison d'etre is currency. It's no different really in a way than the stock of a company. If you don't have the stock of a company, then what's the company? So now you have nations like El Salvador who just announced they're flipping to Bitcoin, right? So what does that mean? How do they then enact monetary policy? How do they then enact and control fiscal policy as well, right? We already saw the European Union collapse on itself in a way and crack because they had this separation between, individual nation states had the control over fiscal policy, but therefore they didn't have to put in place austerity measures, and they had no control over their monetary policy. So that basically break between monetary and fiscal policy led to, problems in Greece where the Germans are saying, wait a minute, you guys are overspending, you need austerity measures. The Greeks are like, no, our laws are fine, thank you very much. We don't need to do anything. And the Germans are like, we're going to cut you off. What's happened now is we're in this world where when you look at blockchain, what got me super excited about it was this is the first time that I saw a governance system that didn't require more government. Now, just think about that for a moment. Every year, our government expands. In the state of California, I pay 13% tax, just in California state tax. On top of that, I'm paying a ton of tax in the federal level. If I live in New York, I'm paying New York State, New York City tax. We are taxed to high heaven right now. And it's because our government just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And with more government, it's like hiring a new marketing person. If I hire a marketing person in my company, I should expect that they're going to want to spend some money. They're going to want to deploy capital against their ideas or something. They have to show their raison d'etre. And then it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. I have a friend of mine in Europe who just came to me and said, oh, his son was just appointed into this high position with the European Central Bank. And he has this job where he has to hire 350 people. And I said, well, for what? He's like, he's got to program a centralized crypto. Centralized crypto. Not decentralized, but centralized. And so I said, well, what's the plan? They said, well, they don't really have a plan on that, but they just mandated that he has to hire 350 people. And anyone who's done programming knows the more programmers you have, the less you get done. It's a fact. I mean, 100%. I know, 100%. If you have I'd rather have a team of less than 10 people who are great and smart programmers than a team of 40. The team of 40 will run in circles and not get anywhere. And I've seen it over and over and over again in multiple companies. I'd much rather have smaller teams because smaller teams actually get things done. By the way, it's the same with government.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's my point. We are now on the precipice of an age where we have a mechanism of government, right? Without more government, of governance that's efficient, that doesn't require more representative democracy. I had in my office 2 very prominent senators come visit me in the last few weeks. Great guys. But let's be real. In today's world, they have to be miles and miles and miles and miles wide and a centimeter deep on anything. So they easily get manipulated by interests that are lobby firm driven, right? And I know because I've played in this space, in the healthcare space especially, right? And so what happens is they have to become not an expert, they have to know a flyer on every topic. And when you go to Washington, I've been many times, you walk through the halls of Congress, what you're going to find is it's just like when you're watching, when we were kids, we'd watch these cartoons, conjunction, junction, what's your function, right? And then I'm a bill on Capitol Hill and all that. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill. You walk in, you see all these people that are dressed like pilgrims, or you see all these people that are dressed like Native Americans, or you see all these people that are dressed, and it's kind of like that. Special interest groups are all over the place. And so what's happening is our Congress is and being lobbied at the same time. They're coming to kiss the ring of all these groups because these groups are the means through which they can run for office. They have to get money from these groups. And they get support, financial support. None of this should be legal, but it is. And in Washington, we have an old saying: if you're not at the table, then guess where you are? You're on the menu.
No, exactly.
If you're not at the table negotiating and fighting for what you believe you need, then you're going to get eaten by all the other special interest groups. So I can tell you that's the way that it is. That's the way it works. And I have participated in that system, and I can't deal with it anymore. I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's horrible. But what's happened now for the first time in our history is that our representatives know less about topics than the general public. That's what I mean by collapsing on the weight of itself. It's hit the end of it's like it hit the maximum point of diminishing returns. And that's why it's about to cycle back and flip polarity. And if we're not careful, we could end up in really strange government models and control mechanisms and fascism or communism, one of these two. And
or some high hybrid with, the giant corporate entities and NGOs. One of the concepts, Robert,
which is really just oligarchy, communism, or fascism. That's how you can look at it. 100%. To me, fascism is just a mask for communism, because you could not show me a single society, and I've studied a lot of this. Show me one society that claimed to be communist that didn't actually end up looking, feeling, acting, smelling, and being just like fascism.
No, absolutely. And like we're the lines are getting blurred, right? Between corporate interests and government mechanisms and all sorts of these other types of non-governmental organizations. But one of the things I like to tell folks, because I had this conversation a lot, Robert, and folks know me as I was a former U.S. intelligence officer, and I worked on the Hill, and I take a very pro-American stance when it comes to cryptocurrency and blockchain, and some of this, the way in which our conversations are going now. Folks look at me like, well, are you looking for like the collapse of the United States or these types of crazy notions? But let me point folks back to this concept. I don't know if you remember from either your high school history days or college, if you were a political science or international relations guy, this concept of American exceptionalism, right? What makes America different? This was originally observed by Alexis de Tocqueville in Democracy in America in the late 1700s, where he came here from France to observe our prison systems. And there's been a couple different theories that have been thrown out. One, this concept of westward expansion. We had all this manifest destiny and all these resources at our disposal. Another one was we didn't have a naturally or an organic aristocracy, right, by birthright, like they had in Europe, or nobility. We have an economic one. But if you're born a duke in Europe, you're a duke, and you're part of a caste regardless. We didn't have that here necessarily in the United States. We had our own type, but it was different. But I think the most striking and telling theory of American exceptionalism, which I think can translate into an era powered by blockchain and into an era where people have transnational identities, right? I'm white, but I'm Catholic, but I'm from the Northeast, but I have relatives in Italy, and like all these other things. You have all these identifiers, and you can connect, or I'm interested in this group, and you can connect with folks in real time, right? And you can have these sort of like transnational groups of influence. But I think the concept of American exceptionalism that I think really holds true is the fact that unlike any other nation state ever, it was an idea first. Right before it was conceived and conceptualized before it actually was birthed. And I think that is a distinguishing element in our history, which I think has, and I haven't quite pegged it out yet, I think has a lot of promise for how America can really succeed in a way that's idea and information powered on the blockchain, more so than in what you think of a physical border. So I do want to leave.
I think you're exactly right. And to me, the two things are not mutually exclusive. So I am a fan. I love the United States. I love America, right? But I'm also a citizen of the world. And what I would say is that loving America is not mutually exclusive to believing that we could have a better governance system. And that governance system should be one that continually evolves. For the first time in human history, we now have the ability to put in place some degree of technology to create a more decentralized system, to bring power back to the people. And for the first time, we could actually move away. I mean, you could start with the very first things, because this is going to be a multi-year trend that's going to, I think, going to happen. And what needs to happen is, I think voting registry needs to get blockchain. I think that there needs to be an absolute protection mechanism on making sure that you can't mess with voting, right? And here we just saw it this last cycle. I felt like I was in a third world nation or some sort of like, despotic regime in either, Central Africa or in Central America. And I don't think it has to be that way. I think that we can allow governance to continue and still allow freedom to ring. What has made America exceptional is its belief that the individual is what is ultimately served in society. It is only through the consent of the governed that we, the people, ever became anything as a true nation state. That's what made America special, right? That we hold these truths to be self-evident, right? That we are all created equally. But what's happened now is that we've gotten to a place where there's so much government and so much control that it doesn't even make sense for people who want to be entrepreneurs to create things or to extend on an American exceptionalism, to really do it. And for the first time in my life, I've actually thought about moving out of this country. Like, seriously, I've never, ever thought, because I love this country. I love this country. So I don't think it's mutually exclusive to love this country and you also therefore have to love the government. Hell no. I don't believe that. So
let me ask you a question, Robert. So what has to happen first? Is it this type of citizen services and sort of adjustment and alterations in how we utilize blockchain at the public level? Or does the ability to, at the market level, control your own data and monetize it in a marketplace fashion, perhaps?
So
that has to happen first.
There's been a lot of talk about, and you got me a lot more passionate about this than I thought I was going to get, but there's been a lot of talk about, a universal basic income. And as a student of economics and as an entrepreneur for many years and professional business person as well, I have a hard time wrapping my head around how that's going to get paid for. Because if it's simply a redistribution, I've seen redistributions just generally don't work for the long term. And it creates long-term consequences, which then lead also to generational biases, which we're already still dealing with and grappling with, that we need to be rid of now, right? All the racist issues and stuff like that. It's like, let's be done with that and let's move on, right? Everybody's equal. Okay, everyone's equal. We all need to just like embrace that and move on. But the thing is that now, for the first time in history, human beings are creating value without even knowing it. For the first time in human history, human beings are creating value by just their normal behaviors. Their data is accruing in value. They're just not the ones monetizing it. So when you go back to that plantation concept, you realize, well, wait a minute, human beings should own their own data. They're the ones sowing the crop. They're the ones, they may not own all the land, but to just simply have the landowner say, no, I'm not going to pay you any part of this is also not right. Even with tenant farmers in Ireland, in the potato famine, the people that lived on the land got a percentage of the surplus, right? They got a piece of the pie. We're not even getting a piece of the pie. We're only exchanging what I would call a contract of adhesion, because we think, oh, I want to cross the street, so therefore I have to pay the toll on the street. But I didn't know that the toll was my firstborn child, right? I had no clue. Or even my own identity. That wasn't part of the contract I signed into. So I believe for the first time in human history, we're creating value, and that happens to be the most valuable asset in the world today. So yes, blockchain should be backed by data because it's more valuable than gold. But it's not just backed by data. It should be backed by the control, the individual sovereign control of data. It should be backed by your control of data. And how do you control data? Encryption. Encryption is actually the thing that has been the absolute anchor, right? That has held in place all of the value for the dollar, because otherwise, if it didn't exist, someone could just steal it out of your account. What use is that? You'd be better
Yeah,
off
we're
with
seeing
gold.
today, Robert, like with more and more frequency, and crypto gets sort of knocked as being the boogeyman in this. But we're seeing more and more the walls of our encryption methodology start to get chipped away, right?
Absolutely. So I envision an exchange where everyone could have their own cryptocurrency. And that's the platform that we have built at Crown Sterling. That's the platform that we're going to. It's like an Ethereum style platform that, Ethereum is an ERC-20, tokenization process for corporations. I see a day where the whole next trend is going to be for individuals. And it's going to start with people with a lot of influence. Therefore, their data is more valuable in a sense because they have more influence, right? Because they have a lot of social media following, whatever. But I think that's going to trickle down all the way down through society. And you can decide in that context if you ever want to sell your data or not, but you'll have it on your own blockchain. And it'll have a marketable value. And that marketable value will also depend if you ever sell it or not. The less you sell, or you could sell it in buckets. You could sell it, it'll be homomorphic, right? So you could sell, I'm willing to sell my data like the stuff that's my purchase history or the things I'm thinking about purchasing in the future. But I don't want to sell any of my personal data or any of my health data, right? So you could bucketize and decide, okay, I'll sell my demographic, my psychographic and stuff like this, and that has a certain value. And there'll be a market value for each of those components, both as an individual sale or you contributing it as an aggregation sale. And I believe that is going to be a huge market exchange. So effectively, it's you putting an NFT on your data.
Yeah, Robert, I think that I think there's going to be an instant market for that. I mean, there's one argument that says, well, the current data arbiters and data sellers wouldn't want to play with something so disruptive. But if you have control over your own data, you could choose, and there will be people who do, choose to provide certain exemplary elements and unique identifying aspects that might not otherwise be able to be collected in aggregate form. And that in and of itself would, I think, seed the market viability, no?
Yeah, well, think about how much money is spent and effort is spent trying to steal data from you without realizing it was stolen. Right? It turns out it takes a lot of effort to fly in and suck your blood and fly out with no marks. And so that's exactly why I think this makes it a much far better way of doing it, because right now they have profiles on everybody that have to be pieced together from all these data that are disparate. And then we have to find a way to create this overall profile that's missing some of the most implicitly important and explicitly important parts, which is your own preferences as an individual, right? The things that you care about, your conscious mind, not just your inferential subconscious data. Right. And so that's how you piece together the overall portfolio and the overall profile for someone. Now, you could decide never to sell it, or you decide you might want to sell certain aspects of it. What I can say is that having those aspects pieced together because you are the one doing the piecing makes this data far more valuable. And I think that is going to be absolutely a mechanism as a backing for cryptocurrency in the quite near future. It's better than gold.
It certainly has like longer and more expansive utility in that. So, Robert, we've I think in just our discussions we hit upon a significant amount of the questions that were coming. We were kind of talking about the topics almost in real time. I just want to take a second to go back and make sure I didn't miss anyone. Yeah, I mean. So do you believe that like open markets for data sales by the individual are going to be the future of decentralized data monetization?
I think it's going to start with the people that are, it won't be long before you have celebrities figuring out that they're better off making their own cryptocurrency.
Now, my concern at like a geopolitical level is obviously speed, and things move rapidly now, and there's always a first mover advantage in things. there's a lot of concern. I have a lot of personal concern with the centralized blockchain that's being created in communist China, where you have the digital yuan that's been launched, ostensibly, obviously, to circumvent the dollar, but also to provide the financial layer to a larger social credit monitoring system. So how quickly do we in the free world need to move before we're completely encircled by a centrally controlled information market that is effectively, you know, data communism?
You know, I think that the good news is that the world is, it's sort of like the example I gave earlier, when they have no choice. And I think we're now coming close to that period of time where the world is coming up to that moment where we're going to have to make some really fundamental choices. But I believe in the resiliency of humanity. I believe in that humanity wants to be free. And being told what you can and can't do, that you can't leave your house, that we've already gotten a taste of this. And freedom, you know, my dad said to me once when I was young, I said, "Oh, Dad, is this thing free?" And he goes, "Son, nothing worth anything is free, not even freedom." So we're definitely at a stage right now where we're going to be confronted with these choices. But I believe organically, and certainly China moves very quickly. The US government is going to come out with their own version of cryptocurrency. I had lunch with Jamie Dimon 2 years ago. He told me that Bitcoin was a fraud. Like, he thought it was a fraud. He didn't only say it to me, he said it to, like, you know, lots of other people that were there. And I can tell you, I talked with him, you know, one-on-one afterwards. And I find it interesting now that, you know, JP Morgan has, you know, definitely moved into the crypto space and is wanting to kind of claim a beachhead in financial management on crypto. And what an about face that is from a fraud, right? Again, ethics come down to whatever it is people believe will benefit them is very often what they call the only ethical choice, right?
Right.
So I think we're at the stage right now where we are going to be forced to make decisions towards our freedom. Polarity will always exist. No matter how we cut it, it's not a coincidence that half the population is Democrat and half the population approximately is Republican, and the 1 or 2% that swings in the middle is what determines all outcomes on elections. It's not coincidence. It's because that's a natural part of electrical polarity, right? We have this bipolar system, and we're going to continue to have that bipolar system. But I also believe that there's going to be a place to bring more voice to the center. And I believe fundamentally that part of that voice is going to be a voice of libertarianism. I believe that voice is going to be what catapults us away from centralized models like communist China and, you know, or fascist China, however you want to call it. It's a fascist regime. It is what it is.
Yep.
Go there. You know, you'll see pictures of, if you go to a country and you see pictures of the leader all over the place in, like, you know, larger than 30 by 50 pictures, you know, like billboard type thing, you know, that's a fascist regime. It is what it is. So history has told us that. And I think right now we've got such a poor educational system. Young people today are just dying for any kind of wisdom and perspective on historical reference, to the point where nobody believes anything. Nobody believes anymore the education system, because we're all tired of being fed narratives that are polarized narratives, one or the other. There's no, and they don't even make any bones about it anymore. Like CNN used to be an independent news station. Now it's sort of like, no, down to Trump. You know, it's like this whole thing. I couldn't even watch it. And the same thing with MSNBC and Fox News too. I can't take it. What happened to balance? What happened to empathy? What happened to us, you know, wanting to try to put ourselves in another person's shoes and try to at least empathize with their perspective? I think that is going to be what brings balance back to this country. And I think that systems that lead back to the individual and back to this whole notion of governments lead by the consent of the governed, the balance must remain intact. And I think that this is going to be one of the mechanisms that does it.
I certainly hope so. And I think we've, you know, seen how, you know, the rise of independent media has certainly been one of, I think, the warning shots right? I mean, we had traditional news outlets. Well, part of the, I think, the impetus to diverge into this type of polarity is the fact that pleasant news doesn't generate click revenue, and right. And this was this competing game for clicks and attention, and you have to get to a hyperbolic type of content in order to generate and being able to adapt to this new model of like you don't have as many print subscribers any longer. But I think that opened a window for independent media. That's that market is sorting itself out and starting to mature. So I think you're absolutely right, Robert. So I think that the this concept of self-discovery and self-knowledge is one of the things that one of the great things the internet has brought to us. Like, there's a kid in the Sahara Desert right now that's taking one of the free online available computing programming classes that Stanford offers. He's taking it on YouTube, and I think that's one example of like how data and interconnectivity and then eventually blockchain can really solve this global trust deficit, right?
Oh, I agree. And I think, that's where this is going. So I'm an optimist. I'm not a pessimist at all. I'm an optimist for the future. I see all of this as no different than an evolution. I don't know if you know the story of a dragonfly, but a dragonfly is born like this little larvae thing that is like a bug that's, underwater. And it lives most of its life underwater, and it climbs up this reed finally to go out of the water because somehow it knows it's time to go out of the water and it's going to become a dragonfly. But it goes through this metamorphosis process, much like a butterfly goes into a cocoon. And as it goes through its own molting process around that, it eventually learns to fly. It becomes a dragonfly, and it flies over the water where it once was and looks down. I see that humanity is going through this dragonfly shift right now. I think the last couple of years has been that. We're all waking up to this extreme polarity, and we're also kind of tired of it. I know I am. I'm just over it. So I want to kind of move on to the next level. And I think the next level is not more of the same, because insanity is defined by doing the same things over and over again and expecting a different result. It's time for some transition and change, but it's not going to be to more government. It's going to be more self-sovereignty, more individual freedom, not less. So that's what I want to believe in, because that's the world I want my children to grow up in. That's the world that I see that could have a tremendous future, the likes of which we've not seen before, which we could take advantage of technologies that could have tremendous global impact positively for humanity. And no longer just thinking about it as a corporation who is, oh, I'm going to benefit, therefore this is right, but what benefits everybody, because it is possible. This whole thing of win-lose, that has to go also with the transcendence of this polarity. And that's the future that I'm excited about.
No, absolutely, Robert. I think that we're obviously in this era of very dynamic and tumultuous change, but I agree. I think that we stand at the precipice of a renaissance of unbelievable proportion if we really take advantage of it.
It's so exciting what can happen. It is so exciting what can happen, and I really believe that I see so much innovation happening right now too. So much innovation. So if we have a mechanism that allows for that innovation to continue to be fostered, then the American exceptionalism and heck, I'd go as far as saying global, this is for humanity too. This whole idea, one of the things that's beautiful about social media is that it breaks down borders. I have people that follow me on social media that are in Iran, right? That literally, I mean, why they even let them do this, I don't know, because they're supposed to be more of a totalitarian kind of regime.
Persians are pretty crafty, I heard.
Yeah, but see, the thing is that, there you go. But the thing is that I have people that literally I am impacting them and they're impacting me. And it may not be absolutely consistent with what their government wants. And it's now gotten to a stage where they can't control it. And they've learned to turn a blind eye to it. But just as communism in Russia fell, because of the entrance of McDonald's and American culture and movies and television and all that other stuff, these regimes that are totalitarian, authoritarian states, they're not realizing that they've hit the end of their expiration date as well.
I believe that too, Robert. And I think that we're right at the end of our time, but I think that's a great way to wrap up our session today, and that we stand at the precipice of something great, and the American ideal and American exceptionalism and blockchain are very much co-aligned. And like I've said before in a few different programs, Bitcoin and blockchain are as American as apple pie.
Absolutely.
And can really take us to somewhere great. So, Robert, thank you very much for being on my show tonight.
Thank you, John. Great to see you.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody, for your questions. Take care. Good night.